This Week in Startups is brought to you by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean is the fastest growing cloud infrastructure provider built for developers. With state-of-the-art data centers around the world, DigitalOcean is laser-focused on its mission to simplify infrastructure for development teams. Visit digitalocean.com/twist and get $10 credit to spin up a server in 55 seconds. And Wistia. Take control of your video marketing with powerful tools and analytics built specifically for business. Go to wistia.com/twist to get your free Wistia account today.
That's what it's all about, man. They said, money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you. Yeah. Money is the root of all evil. What? Funny how it feeds my people. Yeah. We ain't gonna live like equals until we get the money, spend the money, and defeat you.
Thanks everybody. So today I'm just going to give you guys a little crash course in growing a startup, or what the fuck is growth, because people ask me this all the time. So my goal here today is to give you like that tree trunk level understanding of growth, because a lot of the discussion is around like tactics on blogs and whatnot. Those tactics may or may not work for you. I'll show a lot of examples, but the important thing is to understand like what gets people to those examples instead of like I should just copy that specific thing. And yeah, for me, I've been working at Pinterest for a little over 2 years on growth from the product side. Before that, I spent 5.5 years at Grubhub, was the first marketer there. They went public in April 2014. Before that, spent a lot of time in online classifieds. So I've been doing this like tech marketing growth thing, whatever we want to call it this week, for a pretty long time. And I have like some general frameworks that I think you should always approach growth with. But first, let's talk about the purpose of growth as a concept. There's really one purpose of growth. It's to scale users of a product which has product market fit. If you don't have product market fit, you shouldn't be growing a business yet. You should be focusing on product market fit. So we should all be asking is like, am I at product market fit? Should I be growing? And it's like, how do I know? There hasn't really been a very good answer for this. And there's been a lot of mistakes of people that have grown before they were ready. So the short answer of are you ready for growth is you have customers or users that are actively using your product organically, and they'd be pissed if it went away. If that sounds super hand-wavy, it's because it is. So another way to think about it is like, you know who your customers are, you know what your market is, and the thing that keeps you up at night is how do I get more of these customers that I already think are really great. So that still should feel hand-wavy to you. So let's get more into the details of how you can prove it. So doing a cohort analysis is a good way to learn if you're really at product market fit. Are people familiar with cohort analysis, or should I just cover that a bit? Everyone's good? Yeah. So basically, a cohort analysis is you take a group of people that signed up for your purchase, for your service, or had their first purchase during any time period, let's say a month in the case of this graph. And then you will plot over time how many continue to purchase or use that product in the following months. So in this case, you can see this is over a 12-month period, and you see a huge drop-off at the beginning. This is actually pretty natural. You should try to always improve that, but it's not like a, oh shit, I have a terrible business if that happens. What's more important is, does it flatten? That is a strong indication that you have product market fit. It means for a portion of these people I acquired in month 0, they're finding continual value in my product and they're coming back. That's really important to measure. If this thing is going to 0 at 7 months or even like 24 months, it means you haven't proven long-term value for your business. So if you have this, you have at least product market fit for the customers that are in that 10% range 7 months in or not. And if you don't have that, you probably need to think about making product changes to get that. If you need to ask how to find more and make other people engaged as they are, that's actually the next component of product market fit that I care about. So a lot of people will say this alone is product market fit. for me, what I actually want to know is, okay, if that is your graph, can you actually go and acquire more people at that graph? And can you do that at a price point? So what I like to see is, if this is what a cohort looks like, can I acquire users at a cohort that's going to look like this in a case that's going to make me money over the long term? So the question you should ask is, what's long term, and what's my payback period going to be? So for example, if this graph represents me making $100 per user in a year, can I go and acquire more users that are going to look like this average rate of return at less than $100? That would mean you'd have a 1-year payback period, and if you can do that, you have product market fit. For startups, I actually like to see a payback period that is a lot faster than that, something more like 3 months, and then once you get to the mid stage, you can be like 6 months, and then late stage, you can be like a year out. But if you have a cohort that flattens, but then you can't acquire any more users at a price less than the amount you make off of that graph, then you don't have a business because you can't grow. And some of you might ask, well, what if I don't have a business model? That implies that like you need to be able to grow people like that organically without spending any money. So if you see a company that like doesn't have a business model that's spending money on advertising, it's actually a bad sign typically. It means they're either not like growing correctly, or they're just like panicking. They can't grow organically, so they're trying to see if anything works, even though there's no capability of them to like make money at that price point. And then if you're a marketplace, generally there's a couple options. One is you can only focus on spending money to grow one side and then have the other side come for free. So in the case of Grubhub, it's a marketplace where we have restaurants, and then we have people who order delivery food from those restaurants. And so one example is, do you go and you get the restaurants first, or do you go and get the consumers first to attract the restaurants? So Grubhub actually went and got all the delivery menus for restaurants first, put them all up online, and then that was great for SEO, and that got people to come visit Grubhub. And then we went to restaurants and said, hey, there's all these people that are using Grubhub to find, which places to order. Would you like to appear on the site higher than a lot of these restaurants and get more orders? And then later on, Grubhub's like, actually, fuck that. Let's start with restaurants. Let's go send salespeople to a market. Let's sign up 50 restaurants with a pay per performance, cancel at any time contract. And then, once we have these restaurants in, let's say, Soma, we can go out and bid on, Soma Chinese delivery, Soma Thai delivery, and get customers that way and start ranking organically. So you can try both sides. Sometimes supply is going to work. Sometimes demand is going to work to drive customers. And sometimes you can do either side. It's kind of an arbitrary decision. Both will work. But the idea generally is that you should spend most of your time focusing on growing one side, and that should attract the other side. If you spend money to acquire both sides of a market, chances are you might end up spending more on acquisition than you'll make, because if you spend up to their lifetime value on both sides, you'll spend double what you ever make on the business. All right. So a couple cautionary tales. What happens if you scale product market fit? Does anyone remember branch out? Jason remembers branch out. You remember branch out. This was supposed to be a professional networking service built on top of Facebook. Stupidest fucking idea I've ever heard. But back then, Facebook had the Open Graph, where you could basically get a lot of distribution for the Facebook home feed. And Branch Out figured out how to game this, and they had spammy tactics that got a lot of people to sign up without even realizing it. And they hit 25 million users really fast, raised a gigantic Series C round. But that didn't mean they had product market fit. Later, same publication described them as a recruitment train wreck. Sold as an acqui-hire to Hearst. So just because you get 25 million users to sign up does not mean you have product market fit, does not mean you're going to have a good business. That's actually the warm-up tale. The worst tale is Vidi. Does anyone remember Vidi? Okay, a couple more people remember Vidi. Vidi was in fierce competition to be the Instagram for video with SocialCam. And SocialCam kind of knew what they had, and they sold for like 60 million. But Vidi went for it. They raised They raised $30 million at a $370 million valuation, and they were the #1 free app in the App Store for a while, which doesn't mean anything, by the way, because how app rankings work on Apple is just the logarithmic function of downloads in the last 7 days. So if you're able to game downloads, it's going to look like you're a really great app or you're a really popular app, even if people aren't sticking around. So what happened to Video? Well, they lost their CEO. They were forced to cut their staff by a third. They were then forced to send the money back that they had raised to their investors. And then they ended up selling an acqui-hire to a company I'd never even heard of. So moral of the story, don't grow if you don't have product market fit. A lot of companies try, they think it'll solve a bunch of problems. Get the product right first. And if the product isn't right, you should probably ignore the rest of my presentation until you get the product right.
Hey everybody, I want to tell you about DigitalOcean. They are a longtime partner of our program, and we use them for our hosting here at This Week in Startups. It's the best place to get your application off the ground, and it's the easiest place to scale because they use these amazingly fast, awesome servers with SSD drives, solid state drives, and you can deploy them in under a minute, 55 seconds in fact. And of course, DigitalOcean has fantastic user experience that empowers developers and helps you build and scale web applications. You can do customized infrastructure, or you can just choose from a one-click deploy of a popular image, things like Node.js, Magento, Docker. It's a really simple API, and they've got over 550,000 developers deployed on their infrastructure. It's amazing. It's very straightforward pricing, too. That's why people really love it, especially startups. Plans start at just $5 a month. So you can get started and play with it right now. And with hourly pricing, you're only going to pay for the resources you actually use. You get one monthly bill, so it's super easy. Clients include TaskRabbit, Universe.com, Flywheel, Compose, us here at This Week in Startups. And it's really full circle for us here at This Week in Startups because I had Mitch Weiner on as a guest caller on This Week in Startups, 4 or 5 years ago. And then he went on to found DigitalOcean. And now, he has come back and paid us back by sponsoring the program. And I want all the loyal listeners out there who appreciate This Week in Startups to go give DigitalOcean a try. Go to DigitalOcean.com/twist, DigitalOcean.com/twist for a $10 credit. Go ahead and get that $10 credit at DigitalOcean.com/twist. And they're giving a huge credit to all of our incubator companies. Thanks again for that. And thanks for DigitalOcean just sponsoring independent media like This Week in Startups. We couldn't do it without you. Let's get back to this amazing episode.
All right. So assuming you're getting the product right, you're ready for growth. There's actually 3 phases of startup growth drivers that matter. So the first is kind of this free, measurable, scalable method. This is typically product driven. So you'll hear this called growth. You'll hear this called growth product, growth engineering. But the idea is that the things that help grow business the fastest tend not to be spending money on things, tend not to be investing in a huge brand. It's things that are driven from the core of the product. So you generally want to start here and see what opportunities you have. And my presentation is going to focus on this area because that's what I spend all my time on these days, though I have done a ton of the next 2 phases if you want to talk afterward about that. So phase 2, you'll inevitably find that you want to grow faster than growth or growth engineering can provide. So then you tend to move on to paid, measurable, and scalable methods, which you call performance marketing, called growth marketing, digital marketing, those sorts of things. The main difference here is I put free in quotes for phase 1 because engineers and product managers are not cheap, but it's generally not you put in a certain amount of money to get a certain amount of ROI back. Performance marketing is exactly that. You try to measure exactly how much you're spending, exactly how much you're getting more, how much you're getting back for that. And then if you want to get more, you spend more. So that's typically why you wait to do that later on. And inevitably you'll find after a while that, hey, like all my growth product stuff is kind of maxed out. My paid measurable stuff is at an efficient frontier. So then you invest in more things that are
paid, but they're not measurable and they're not scalable. So this is typically brand marketing, campaign marketing. You put a lot of that effort up front instead of being able to test like you can do in performance marketing or growth. You launch something, it may or may not work. You may not be able to tell. And even if you can tell, you generally need to do something totally different for that to work again. So generally you want to wait as long as possible to try doing a lot of these sorts of things. So represented graphically, you can see that you don't have to do these entirely serially. They can add on top of each other. But the way I like to think of it is when you start getting diminishing returns or you start hitting like a natural bottleneck and how much more you can do in one area, that's where you think like, do I want to be growing faster than I'm growing today? And can I do that via investing in one of these new types of channels? So you've probably heard Paul Graham from a not as successful incubator talk about doing things that don't scale. So why does he say that? So this is advice for getting to product market fit. It's not about really scaling a business. It's about finding a way to get to product market fit, or this like go-to market growth concept. And like in general, growth teams, which you might hear as a concept, and certainly I'm on a growth team, everything about it is scale. It's about how can we do things that hit millions upon millions of customers. It's not about getting 10 customers here, 20 customers there. That's about, do I have enough customers out there to prove my model? So basically, when you're starting, you want to do whatever you can to validate product market fit. And the previous slide, you don't need to apply to that, right? If it's going to be cheaper or faster to spend some money on Facebook ads to validate whether you have a business than to spend like the 6 months iterating on SEO, you do that because you want to know if you have the right product. And you don't need to worry about like, oh, am I going to be able to take those 50 customers I got from Facebook and turn that into 50 million? You just need to prove like, do I have that core group, back to that cohort slide, that cares about what I'm doing and is continuing to come back. So you probably have seen and probably have been envious of certain startups that seem to just fly right out the gate. That have like a really smart go-to-market growth strategy. I would actually tell you, don't worry about that. Like they're actually very dangerous, right? So obviously Vidi and Branch Out are examples of that. But you don't want to expose the product to too many people before you know you have the right product, because people are rarely going to give you a second chance. So spend that time making sure you got the right product, then try to apply growth tactics to really like put the pedal to the metal and grow as fast as possible. An exemption of that is if you're in a chicken and egg scenario, which two-sided marketplaces are in, or two-sided networks are in, like dating. So this is the only time where go-to-market growth strategies might matter. I talked a little bit about how Grubhub approached that, right? Where, sometimes it's obvious to focus on supplier demand or men versus women. Sometimes it doesn't matter. So you want to spend some time early on to get to product market fit, thinking about like, what are the ways I can test this? Should I be starting with supply? Should I be starting with demand? Should I be starting with men? Should I be starting with women? Because if you probably can't prove if you have a market there unless you get a certain amount of people on the platform transacting with each other. So going back to growth, the traditional marketing funnel looks a little bit something like this. You make people aware of your product, you get them interested, some evaluate, some commit to trying it, and then some eventually use it. This is how marketing has worked for decades. But it's actually not the most effective way to think about marketing for a startup. This is based on an old model of like making people want things instead of making things people want. Startups should really focus on the latter. And if you can do that, you can invert the traditional marketing funnel and be much more successful. So in this case, you start with the few people, however few there are, loving the product. You move into people that are trying the product for the first time. Then you go after people that have tried the product. Then you go after people that need the product. Then you go after people that fit the core audience of the product. And then finally, after that, you do your general awareness. So you basically do everything the opposite of what a traditional marketer would tell you, which means be careful if you're hiring like a VP of marketing and it's someone that doesn't have any technology or startup experience, because they might not have learned this yet and steer you in the really wrong direction. So how does that translate into tactics? So if you're talking about people loving the product, you generally just want to make sure the product's good, right? Like that will drive people to come back to it organically. And then you want to see if there's any virality components you can do to make the people who like it talk about it more, talk about it to their friends. We saw some examples of that in your pitches, which is great. Then to people who are trying the product for the first time, again, you want to make sure the actual product is good. You also want to focus on conversion optimization to get as many people that are landing on the page to actually do the thing you want them to do. And you want to invest in onboarding, which we call new user experience or NUX, to make sure that people understand the true value your product can have. Next, for people trying the product, that's when you would invest in things like notifications, email, SMS, push, to really make sure that you can get people who have tried the product back to create that habit. Then if it's people who need the product but haven't used it, that's typically when search comes into effect. So AdWords, search engine optimization. People are searching for exactly what you do. You should try to get in front of them. Next is when people fit the core audience. That's when you want to start doing like your targeted advertising, like a Facebook ads, where it's like, I want people 18 to 34 in San Francisco. And then at the end, you would think about like actually doing campaigns or your typical brand marketing. So it's just total inversion. And here are like the specific tactics you would think about and in a helpful order in how to think about it. So what is growth optimized for? Growth is not just about first usage. It's about all projected and volume of future use. So, we looked at that in the cohort, but in terms of how that translates into a metric, it's revenue per user over a certain lifetime. So we talked a bit about, what lifetime means. So the traditional definition of a lifetime is really forever, like as long as people use the product. But when you're thinking about growing a business, you generally want to be very conservative about what you think your lifetime is. Like I said, 3 months for an early stage product, 1 year for something that's very defined, like Pinterest. So be conservative in your lifetime. And if you're switching to performance marketing, you want to make sure that any cost you're paying is well less than your LTV. So you've got all these frameworks. You're at product market fit, and now it's like, okay, well, how do I actually do this? So the way growth typically works is that you run experiments. These don't necessarily need to be like a perfect A/B experiment, but you need to have a hypothesis and you need to throw something out there and see if it works. At early stages, pre-post experiments are fine. Basically, you want to see a huge impact from something you did, and if you can't tell based on a pre-post analysis if something worked, then chances are it didn't have the impact you wanted. So you probably should switch to something else anyway. And then as you get bigger and you're like, oh, I'm doing a bunch of experiments, I can't tell if they're working, that's when you might want to invest in an Optimizely or something like that.
Hey everybody, let me take a moment to tell you about a product I love and use every day. It's video hosting from Wistia, W-I-S-T-I-A, Wistia. It is awesome. And who uses it? MailChimp, Moz, HubSpot, Zendesk, Herman Miller, Sam Adams, and of course, This Week in Startups. They've got 140,000 customers, and they are growing like a weed. Now, why do we use it? Well, if we use a free service like YouTube, we have all YouTube's ads and collaterals and garbage, and it looks terrible, and it's not customizable. So it looks bad, and everything that YouTube does is in service of increasing their metrics, not your metrics. Well, what are your metrics as a business? Well, for me, it's collecting emails. 2, it's having people on my domain, my site, making it look beautiful, not having that ugly thing that comes up at the end of a YouTube video that shows all the different videos of other people that I don't want to send my users to. I want, when the video ends, for them to watch another episode of This Week in Startups. I can control all of that. with Wistia. That's why I use it. And it works perfectly on Facebook and Twitter with the cards, and you can play it natively on those platforms. It's gorgeous, and it'll give you a ton of support. You want to take control of your video. Video is a huge asset, and you want to do it professionally. The analytics program is amazing. You can see on a user-by-user basis how long they're watching, and if they rewound and watch a section twice, all this kind of great stuff. Tons of support, super easy to use. And it's built, a lot of their new tools are built for marketers, so collecting emails and that kind of stuff. And you don't have YouTube or Vimeo doing that kind of stuff. Those platforms have their own goals, which is selling ads and keeping people on their platforms and stealing those users from your platform. Start your 2-week trial for free on Wistia, wistia.com/twist. No credit card is required because they're so confident that you're going to love the service like I do. And you can upload as many videos as you like. Wistia.com/twist, WISTIA, Wistia.com/twist. I love the product. I love the team. And it's been fantastic for us. We got control of our own videos again. And we are now collecting emails every day, dozens of emails every week, hundreds of emails every year, thousands of emails to build our direct relationship. That is not have an intermediary between it, telling us how we can talk to you, our fans. We have a direct relationship. It's brilliant. I love Wistia. All right, let's get back to this amazing episode.
So what do you work on? Well, you pick the part of the growth funnel that you think has the biggest room for improvement, right? So is it people coming at the top of the funnel? You just need more people to try you. Is it people try you once and never come back? You think about which one of those is the biggest opportunity, and you spend most of your time there. And then eventually when you get to Pinterest size, you will have dedicated teams working on every part of the growth funnel. And lastly, you want to start with projects that have like a very low effort, high impact, and high chance of success. So there's a tendency for a lot of people when they're working on products, they're like, oh, let me just go do the hardest thing first. Let me get that out of the way. Or let me go after like the biggest like opportunity that's like a moonshot. Terrible idea. Like find stuff that's easy. Like when people sign up, like the password field breaks half the time, like just fix that, like 5-minute fix or whatever, focus on that stuff. And eventually you will have to move into harder and harder things to grow your business faster, but you shouldn't start there. You should try to find what are the easiest things that I can do that I know are going to be successful. Thanks. So what's the growth phase of a company? What are those pieces of the funnel? It's acquisition, activation, retention, referral, and revenue. So Dave McClure, also from a less successful incubator, calls these R, or startup marketing for pirates. And depending on your business, you might focus on all 5 of these, or there might only be 3 that actually matter. So for Grubhub, for example, acquisition and activation are the same thing. You either order food or you don't. There isn't this concept of people trying Grubhub but then not ordering food. It just doesn't make sense. But for Pinterest, acquisition and activation are very different things. There are plenty of people who sign up for Pinterest, but then they don't ever pin anything, right? Those are 2 separate problems that we need to make sure we address. Likewise, retention and revenue might be very similar problems for certain companies. So for Grubhub, like retention is ordering food again, and that's how Grubhub makes money, by charging restaurants every time there's an order. But for Pinterest, you can come a lot to Pinterest and not necessarily do actions that are monetizable for us. So do you need to think about these as separate problems or not? It is something that you should think about. In the case of Pinterest, we actually have revenue handled by a separate team from the growth team, so it's a problem that like we completely separate from growth. But in other companies, like this might be where the bulk of your growth team works. All right, so talking about tackling the growth phase, I'm gonna get into a lot of examples here. So let's start with just like what are the actual like tactics that you do in each of these phases. So acquisition, word of mouth via product quality is like the first thing you should always be thinking about. It's not necessarily a case of if you build it, they will come. But sometimes if you build something amazing, a small portion of people will talk about it. So you want to make sure that you're doing that first. And the other pieces of acquisition that really matter is conversion optimization, which is like of the people that land on your service, how do you get them to do the thing you need them to do? And search engine optimization, which is showing up when people are searching for something relevant for your business. On activation, it's generally about an onboarding that makes sense and like delivers you to the product value very quickly, and then ongoing user education to make sure that people can gradually become more and more engaged in the product. I'll talk about some examples. Retention is generally email, push, SMS, things that are going to inorganically get people back into the product. And then referral is things like viral loops or referral codes. So things that get your current user base to bring in more users for you. And I won't talk about revenue because it generally depends so much on the business that there isn't things that are like super easily applicable to everyone. All right. So let's dig in on these different tactics. So word of mouth via product quality. So the first thing that's really important to nail here is a compelling value proposition. So Robinhood does an amazing example of this. You land on their homepage, free stock trading, stop paying $10 for every trade. It just couldn't be simpler what the value proposition is for this startup in a traditional financial services space where it's really hard to understand what the value propositions are. So they've really nailed this and they've been really growing fast pretty organically. The second piece that I would urge you guys to focus on for product quality is just like maniacal focus on quality improvement in general. We had this problem at Pinterest in 2014 where product development had like shiny new toy syndrome. We're like, we're going to build a messaging feature. We're going to build a Q&A product. We're going to build place pins. And we built a lot of those, and none of them meaningfully impacted the growth of Pinterest, just totally negligible. But after that, we started doing more international research, and international is where the bulk of our growth is occurring right now. And we saw that people were getting largely English content when they signed up for Pinterest. And we're like, oh, it's visual service. Who cares? No one's reading that stuff. It mattered. People were like, oh, this stuff isn't for me. This is not Brazilian content. This is not French content. So we went back to our core algorithm and we started adjusting instead of for global popularity for local popularity. Activation rates increased on the order of like 15%. International growth rates improved, all from just taking what we have, something we've been doing for years, which is recommending content for users and making it better for certain parts of the people that were coming to the product. Way more impact than building a messaging product inside of Pinterest. So conversion. Conversion's a passionate topic of mine. I talked at the Scale conference entirely about conversion. So I'll run through just a couple things here, but feel free to talk to me in more detail about this. So the first thing that's interesting about conversion is forms. Probably the least sexiest thing on the planet to work on. But I have a couple examples of where this really mattered. So Pinterest, when you used to sign up, we used to ask you to pick a username. Pinterest was growing really fast. You're like, oh, is my username taken? What should my username be? How do I want my persona to be portrayed on Pinterest? So it added a lot of cognitive load, and we saw a large drop off at this step. So we just removed it and instead auto-generated a username based on your name, like your first and last name that you already given us. Conversion rates improved dramatically just from removing that step. Another example from Grubhub is the credit card field. I don't know how many of you actually know this, but the first number of your credit card actually tells you if it's Visa, MasterCard, or Amex. So you don't need to ask people to say it's Visa, MasterCard, or Amex. Just have them type in the number and you get all the information you need. So removing that step for Grubhub, it decreased errors on a form when people are hungry and they're not even thinking straight. So it helped improve our conversion. Something very minor like that helps. So the next piece is landing page optimization. So landing page optimization, you are generally trying to take more of people that are landing on a certain page and getting them to do whatever you need them to do next, whether that's fill out a form, just click on a button, whatever that case may be. So I'll give a few examples here. This is what we call gift wrap at Pinterest. So you can see we start with a page, and as you scroll down, there will be a banner partially obscuring the content saying, hey, there's more of this content here. You should sign up to see it. This was a 2-day project that increased conversion rates 50% for Pinterest. And The reason why is before all we had was a little tiny thing at the top saying sign up. People would quickly scroll past it to see what they came to see, and they didn't have any idea like why they would sign up for Pinterest or that there was more here. So we started stopping the amount of pins you could see, and then if you continued scrolling, you would get what looks like our homepage asking you to sign up to see more. So that's one example. Another example is mobile app conversion. So when people come from Facebook or search engines onto your mobile web, it's a big opportunity to say like, hey, stop using the browser, start using our application. So what we did here is anytime you land on a mobile web page, you get something that looks like an interstitial, but it's actually just a header saying like, hey, that Pinterest works better in our app. And then you can scroll past it to see the content. We've done about 10 iterations, successful iterations on this sort of interface to try to get more people to download our app. Significant gains from this work. Not a lot of real estate that you're working with, but like supremely valuable because if any of you have mobile apps, you will see the activation rates on mobile apps are just way higher than activation rates of like mobile web signups. The example from Grubhub is our search field. So at Grubhub, we had this problem where we had our homepage, which was basically just a giant search your address for food box, and these specific landing pages, like I mentioned, like Soma Chinese food. And what we couldn't figure out was that the Soma Chinese food page, which had way more information, was way more locally relevant, and actually converted worse than our homepage. So we just took a look at the two pages. One was a giant search box, and one was like a search box over to the right and a bunch of search box over to the left, and a bunch of local content on the right. So we just said, hey, why don't we just copy paste the giant search box to the top of this page and see what happens? And we did that, and conversion rate improved. It turns out Grubhub, we need your full address to provide you good recommendations on where to order from, because delivery boundaries vary a ton. So just making sure that you're comparing the data you have from different pages and saying like, well, why would this page convert better than this other page? And then you might find a good opportunity. I'm not going to talk about details here, but funnel optimization is also important in conversion. So if you're trying to get someone to make a purchase or generally follow a bunch of steps, you want to understand like, are there any parts of that step that are breaking the chain? So generally what you would expect a healthy funnel to look like is it's logarithmic. Kind of like that cohort where you're going to lose a lot of people at the beginning and you should lose very few people at the end. If you find that like you map a funnel and it's not looking healthy logarithmic, whatever page is preventing it from looking logarithmic is typically a page where there's a usability or a conversion problem, and that is where you want to like spend some time redesigning that, understanding what's going wrong. Lastly, with conversion, just everything over the long term becomes a giant user psychology problem. It's all about understanding the consumer behavior of someone that lands on a page, what they're thinking, what their biases are, and how can you overcome them. Typically, this requires a lot of user research. So if it's like stopping someone on the street and showing them a flow, that's one way to do it. Or if it's putting someone behind like a two-way mirror, which we do at Pinterest, and watching them use it, anything that helps you understand like, oh, they don't understand that like you don't have to actually type a password anymore because of Touch ID, like stuff like that. Those are the things that you really need to understand and interpret and iterate off of. All right, so search engine optimization. This is another one of the few free ways to grow really quickly. It's really about two things. So it's about authority, and it's about relevance. So I'll give you a couple of examples. So authority basically means that are other people linking to you, and are those other people important themselves? So if you get a link from a newspaper site, that's going to indicate that you're relevant, that you're authoritative. And if you get a link from someone's blog, it's not going to matter as much unless that blog is hugely popular. So at Grubhub, we have this problem where we're continually launching new cities. So we would launch, when I started, it was in Chicago, then we launched San Francisco, we launched Boston, then we ended up launching 600 different cities. But when you launch in a market, you have no authority there. So what we did is we would launch in a new city, and we would go to a bunch of newspaper sites, blogs that were local, and we'd say, hey, we just launched Grubhub in your city. We want to give your users $10 off their first meal to celebrate our launch. But the only way they can get that is if they follow this specific link. And that link would auto-apply the deal, but after 30 days, it would just switch to linking to our like landing page specifically for SEO. So that all of a sudden we would have a bunch of links from locally relevant sources to our Philadelphia food delivery page. And that was a way that we could generate authority. There's plenty of other ways to do that. For relevance, both Pinterest and Grubhub have used very similar approaches here. So Pinterest, we're blessed with 70 billion pieces of content being added organically to our system, which is great. And then they furthermore are organized into boards that people say, hey, all this stuff goes together. And that helped us rank on search engines originally. But if you think about it, a board on Pinterest is one person's point of view on things that are relevant in a certain topic, let's say woodworking. Whereas Pinterest had collected all this data on what are the most repinned pieces of content related to woodworking, what are the most liked pieces of content. So what we started doing is we started creating our own landing pages that just aggregated all the best stuff for every topic we knew about, whether it's, Chukka boots or, woodworking or mid-century modern. And we just made all of that available to search engines. And people that came from search engines liked it because they were seeing all of the best stuff on the thing that they just searched for. And we did something very similar with Grubhub, right? Where everyone is searching for food delivery. Some are going to search for that. Some are going to search for Soma Chinese delivery. Some are going to search for, Richmond District Thai delivery, or they're going to search for Berkeley or whatever the case may be. Every cuisine combination with a geography tag, we built pages for, and we showed the restaurants we specifically had in that area to searchers. So it was all locally relevant content. Another good example for Pinterest is this concept of a canonical description. So the main thing that prevents Pinterest from being relevant for a search engine is that we're all images, so Google can't read the images. They have no idea what they're for. Some people, when they pin an image, they actually describe it themselves, though. So what we started doing is we're like, hey, we have 70 billion images, but a bunch of these are just copies of other images. What if we said, okay, we're not going to show 70 billion images to Google. We're going to show only one image, only one unique image, instead of if you and I had pinned the same thing, showing both of those to Google. And then what we're going to do is we're going to take Justin's version of that pin, and we'll put every other person who's described it, we'll put their description below that. So Google has all of the different ways people on Pinterest describe that piece of content, and they have that one page to find it on. And that increased traffic to our pin pages dramatically, because all of a sudden Google had real people describing this piece of content, across this network, instead of oh, here's one image with no description, here's one with 5 words descriptions. All right, so onboarding. There's generally a lot of different things here, and I'd recommend useronboard.com is a great resource to understand good onboarding flows versus bad. An example from Pinterest is addressing the cold start problem. So when a lot of people sign up for your service, they're going to basically get an empty service because they haven't done anything yet. They haven't made any friends yet. And this is a time where a lot of people are just I'm out. I don't understand immediately what to do, and I'm not seeing any value. So what Pinterest did is when you signed up, we made you follow whitelisted accounts that were really good pinners. And that trained you both on how to use the product, because we gave you someone to emulate, but then it also meant that your feed was populated when you started without you having to do anything. You automatically got some of the best content we had. That created other issues because most of the people who signed up in the beginning were female. So then when men signed up, they got female whitelisted accounts, and they're like, oh, this product isn't for me. So then we changed that to now you pick topics when you sign up. So men get, topics they're interested in, women get topics they're interested in. So we didn't knock it out of the park at the beginning with the whitelist, but it was definitely a way to get over the cold start for a specific audience. So the next thing to do with onboarding and user education is make it clear how the user gets value from your product and why the questions you ask will help provide that value. So if you're asking for someone's age, tell them why that matters. If you're asking for someone to pick topics, tell them what you're going to do with that information. You're going to customize the home feed in our case. If you don't, people will skip that to their detriment, or they will just bounce from the flow because it's like, oh, this is going to take 30 minutes to fill out. And that's related to the next point, which is you want to show and endow progress. So if it's only going to take 3 steps to get into the meat of the product, show that they're on step 2 and they already did step 1 just by opening the app, something like that. And the other thing is you want to make education contextual. So you want to make it available when it's needed instead of like a whole tutorial before a user even sees the real product. So if someone's going to Pinterest and they land on the profile page, that would be the time to educate on what the profile page is, not like, 10 pages of all the things Pinterest has before they've even seen the real product. So retention is all about notifications, as I mentioned before. There is a ton of meat here, so I'll just mention a few things that matter and move on. So one is that generally want to test manually emails and notifications and then automate and personalize what works. So in the case of Grubhub, I pitched our co-founder on like, hey, I want to do a personalized email marketing program. He's like, no. Not going to spend the end resources on it. So what I started doing is I started grouping people by city and picking like 5 restaurants per week that would cover like the broad range of the city. So like all the different neighborhoods, hopefully. And then I would just email that to everyone in the city and hope that like one of those restaurants delivered to you. Did that for like a year, built that up to over 1% of orders coming in through email, and then had the data to justify the engineering investment into actually building something more personalized and automated, which then went to like, over double the value that the email marketing program brought in. In terms of what to optimize for, subject lines matter a lot, calls to actions matter a lot, design generally doesn't matter as much, unless you got something really compelling. You see 50% differences in open rate by changing a subject line. We've seen it at Pinterest multiple times, saw it at Grubhub multiple times. These things are not hard to test, right? So all you're doing is spending like 5 minutes thinking of a different way to describe something. So pay attention to that. Don't assume that like an email sucked just because you sent it out and it got a low open rate. It might just be change the subject line and all of a sudden it gets high open rate and people really engage with it. One thing to remember with email is don't get aggressive early on. Email vendors track how much email you send to their users. They will stop delivering your mail if you get low engagement rates. So you want to make sure that the stuff you're sending works before you're sending, in the case of Pinterest, over 2 billion emails a month. You want to really make sure you have stuff that's really ready. And then there's a lot more sophistication that, some email vendors can help with, which in terms of, how many IP addresses you need to have per vendor and stuff like that. But generally you can find a tool that will solve that for you. And the last recommendation here is if you need push notification acceptance, tell people why you need it with your own prompt before suggesting the Apple prompt, because you're only going to get one shot at having people say yes or no to the Apple prompt. And if you miss that, it might totally ruin engagement with your product long term. So explain why you're going to do it with your own flow, then ask people if they're interested, and if they say they're interested, then cue the Apple prompt. Lastly, mix it up. Don't send the same email or notification like every Friday. It'll get annoying to even the most engaged users, so try to find like different types of content. All right, referrals. Referrals are hard. So you need a strong value prop, and you generally, money's a good value prop, and getting a better product experience if you invite someone is another good value prop. But if you don't have either one of those, it's generally going to be pretty hard to make referrals the primary way you grow. So like, don't feel like your product is doomed just because your referrals don't work. Like, it doesn't work for a lot of companies. The other piece you want to understand is it one-to-one referrals that work, or is it like one-to-mass referrals that make sense? So an example here I'll give is Everlane. So Everlane, they basically had this sort of flow where it's a little bit blurry, but if you signed up one friend, you would get a free preview of them launching their new line. But if you signed up 15 friends, you got a free t-shirt. If you signed up 25 friends, you got a $50 credit. And then if it's 50 friends, I believe it was free shipping for life. And what they optimized for is they had a few key people that had signed up for Pinterest that had just like amazing follower accounts on Twitter and on other social services, and they would just optimize to get those people to tweet or whatever about Everlane, and they got over 100,000 signups pre-launch of their line by doing that. Whereas if they had focused on like email referrals one-to-one, those like huge influencers would not have driven nearly as much value for them. There are other cases where like one-to-one is totally the way to go. So you want to test like, do I want to get one person, send out really broad, which can be annoying if done wrong, or do I want to tie that personal connection into my referrals? So that's all I have. I will make these slides available. I'll figure out how to do that. And here are some resources that go into more detail on some of the specific growth areas I talked about. And yeah, we can open it up for questions.
Okay, super comprehensive. We'll take some questions from the audience. We've got a microphone going. But let me first ask you, today when you look at sites like Wealthfront, Uber doing, give to get,
Yeah.
how are people applying that outside of places where real money exists?
Yeah.
The Everlane example I think is pretty great, but that still involves money.
Yes.
Is there a give to get that doesn't involve cash?
There is. I think Dropbox is the best example of this.
Sure.
So Dropbox, their play was like give space, get space, something that was pretty marginal cost to them, if anything, but it was a huge driver of growth for them. In fact, I believe referrals are still the #1 driver of growth for Dropbox on the consumer side. Enterprise is probably still sales driven. But you need to have like a virtual currency if you don't have a real currency. So this is something Pinterest struggles with, right? Like people have found that Pinterest is a valuable tool for personal use. They don't need their friends on it to get value from it. So it's not a social network in that regard, right? Aren't
there pinners who people really feel passionate about following, but they're not quite to the level of YouTube stars?
Right. Yes.
Explain that phenomenon.
Yeah. So, it goes back to the whitelist, right? Of like there were early pinners that were really good at curating stuff, so we wanted to show them to more people, and we showed them to a lot of people when Pinterest grew really fast. So all of a sudden they had 50 million followers, and they're getting approached by, these CPG companies to like hawk products and things like that. So that creates another problem, right?
Is that against the terms of service?
That is against the terms of service. So you want to make sure that like they're continuing to pin for like for the right reasons instead of the wrong ones.
So these ad networks that I saw pop up of you could buy 20 influence from 20 pinsters.
Yeah.
What do you call people who are YouTubers? Like, what's the equivalent in pinsters?
Oh, pinfluencers.
Pinfluencers.
Yeah.
So the pinfluencer marketplace is actually breaking the terms of service, essentially.
Yeah, so it was. Now we've started to work with those businesses to really like find something that fits within our terms of service. Mm-hmm. So what's happened to most of them, I think, and I'm not the person at the forefront of this knowledge, but I think most of them have pivoted into like Pinterest marketing services in general. So they're early access to our API, things like that.
Got it.
Instead of like, hey, go talk about Hellman's mayonnaise right now.
Yeah, and so how important is it to set up the infrastructure for doing tracking? A lot of folks here are using a MailChimp or an Optimizely or Localytics or Mixpanel. How important are those tools in terms of doing what you do, and which ones do you recommend? And does a site like Pinterest make their own, or do you actually use some of the major brands out there to do analysis?
Pinterest pretty much builds its own for everything at this stage, which is not what I would recommend for anyone in this room. So, I'll give you one example. We were looking at email marketing vendors, and basically after talking to some of them for like over a month, they're like, hey, Pinterest, we can handle your volume or your level of personalization. We actually can't handle both. So it kind of forced our hand to build our own.
Yeah.
certain engineering cultures are more solve your own problems than others as well. And Pinterest has a strong engineering culture around that. So I think our general penchant is to try to build things ourselves. But for example, for deep linking, we use branch metrics because deep link has been a really hard problem for us. And it's really valuable in getting people into our mobile app, which is where 80% of our usage happens. So that's a vendor that we use and we recommend. But yeah, it's mostly building our own tools. In terms of early stage, it's important to get like a foundation that can give you a high level read on your metrics. So if you're a company that's like focused on a mobile app and you need to spend money to drive app installs and you can't tell what your cost per signup is because you don't have Adjust or AppsFlyer installed, like you just can't scale your marketing. So it's really important to get like a good Mixpanel set up or, Kissmetrics or wherever the case may be.
Even Google Analytics has this feature now. Yeah.
Google Analytics is better. So all early stage Grubhub was Google Analytics and me writing SQL queries. And that's all that existed for years. Generally, any person that comes into Pinterest, we're like, you're going to learn SQL. It's just going to happen, and you're going to accept it. Because a lot of the data is hidden deep in there, and you're going to need to learn how to query it yourself to get it out.
At a startup company, you have 5 or 10 people, let's say, at these early seed stage companies. Once you have that product market fit, people like the product, of course, you're going to keep improving it. On a percentage basis, how would you allocate the 10 hours a day somebody's working at a startup? Let's say if you're working a nice solid 50-hour week. Is it 50-50 growth to the, advancing the core product? Is it 75% growth, 25% advancing the core product? Do you have any general ideas about that?
It really depends on the product. So like what I would compare is, so ultimately growth is the goal, right? If investing in the core product is going to drive more growth than investing in SEO, you should do that. But you should start to build up a sense of what's going to provide more value. When you get to Pinterest stage, you have people working on both, and you allocate engineering, design, and product resources based on like whose roadmap looks more impressive. So that's how we generally do it at a bigger company.
And you also have unlimited resources that you've earned to a certain extent. Like there's a ton of resources available to a high growth company, but when you're going to high growth, no resources.
Yeah, exactly, right? So the way I think about like growth early stage is like you have that funnel, right, of things that, acquisition, activation, engagement, and you're like, okay, what are the things that can grow these different areas? What are the biggest problem sets? Is my retention rate too low? Is my number of new users coming in too low? And then is it a product change that's going to improve that? Or is it investing in SEO? Or is it spinning up an email program? But I would almost say like almost all decisions once you reach product market fit for a while should be like, is this going to grow the company the fastest? It's a while before you have like a core product that works, before you want to be like, let me go into this totally new market. That's like almost like public company level. You should wait until that before you're like building a second product. Obviously like Uber's doing that, but Uber for all intents and purposes probably should be public at this point. But
it would have been in a previous lifetime. These companies would have been public. Pinterest, in fact, would have probably been at this point.
Yeah, Pinterest probably would be as well.
So
waited longer for revenue.
The addition of the second business line, the second business unit is like a year 5, 100 million users or 100 million in revenue. And we see young startups working on their second and third product before they've gotten the first one dialed in. Classic mistake.
Yes, yeah.
It's the death mistake.
Yeah.
It's typically death.
Focus is such a key value in determining how successful a startup founder is going to be. One of the things that I didn't appreciate at Grubhub at the time was this founders had a maniacal focus of like, we're doing food delivery, we're doing only food delivery, we're not doing pickup, we're not doing catering, we're just going to do food delivery. And we did that for probably the first 8 years. And when we eventually got enough people to like rally for a pickup product and we launched it, it didn't really impact our growth, and people generally thought it was a mistake to have launched it.
Right. So even when you did it,
yeah,
it still was a mistake.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
But so there's a difference between launching 3 products that you intend to keep and launching like 3 experiments of which you intend to keep one, right? So if you're at that stage where you're just figuring out what you're going to be focusing your time on, having two things isn't necessarily a bad idea, but like it should be with the strict definition of like, I'm going to pick only one.
And it's important in a startup in terms of the leadership to say, hey, we're going to do this thing. This is an experiment.
Yes.
This is not a permanent feature of the product. It's an experiment. It has a duration of X, and we're going to look at the results and see if Y happens, we're going to do this, and if Z happens, we're going to do that.
Exactly.
Just sort of so everybody's in the same sheet of paper. Because I've seen companies say, like, the founder says, oh, we're going to do this experiment. And then everybody's like, oh my God, we're building 2 products. And well, I think he just said, or she said, this is an experiment. Right.
Yeah, shared understanding, especially as a startup grows, becomes harder and harder. So really over communicating as a leader is super important. And like I struggle with that sometimes at Pinterest, right?
I struggle with everything I do too. Yeah, you used to say like, this is an experiment. And then people still say, well, is this going to become what I do every day?
Yeah. Yep.
And they're not wrong in a way, because an experiment could lead to them doing it every day.
Right.
But it would have to be under a certain result in the experiment for that to occur.
Yeah, I mean, and generally, like the best course of action is to have a strong vision at the beginning as to what you're building and not build that second product. But like, I understand not all founders have that. They know they want to do something in their bones, but they don't know if it's going to be a B2B product, a B2C product, something in between. But like, if you're trying to scale with like 2 products early on, like you've done something wrong along the way, I think.
Because you don't even have the resources to set up the infrastructure and get through that checklist with 1 product. So now the impossible checklist of things you need to prepare yourself for growth, to have important growth discussions, you're not even going to get to half of it.
Yeah, exactly.
If you have 1, let alone if you have 2, now you're going to get to a quarter of it.
Yeah, even with 1 product, you're going to feel like there's millions of things you're not doing today that you need to be doing, right? So if you have 2 or 3 products you're supporting, you're just you're not going to build anything good, most likely, and it's not going to grow very fast either. And if something does happen to grow fast, ditch the other stuff.
Okay, who's got the first question about growth and infrastructure for growth? Everybody is just totally taken. They're in awe of you, Casey.
I have a small question.
Okay, small questions are important. Details matter.
Thank you very much. This was amazing. Just a great talk. So my question is about priming for push. I've heard other people say that basically everybody's binary on whether they're going to say yes or no to push, and actually that's the one thing that you shouldn't prime for. Have you? I've heard people say exactly what you said, which is that you should always prime for push because it's so important. So I guess my question is, what's your
So going against my advice, we actually don't prime for push at Pinterest. Because we haven't found the right thing that like triggers it, but other people have. So the
Define
case.
one more time, prime for push.
Oh, okay,
everybody understands.
so generally this is purely an iOS issue today, but it will be an Android issue fairly soon as Android M continues to roll out. You need to ask people specifically if you can send them push notifications, and it's an Apple system prompt.
The ugly system prompt.
Yeah. But
We've all seen it so many times.
Yeah. But what you can do is when you want to cue that system prompt, actually do not cue the system prompt. Cue something of your own design that gives a little bit more education as to why someone might want to turn on push notifications. And then if they click allow, then you throw up the Apple prompt. And if they click no, you just don't cue the Apple prompt and you try to figure out a rainy day where you can maybe surface it again more contextually relevant.
So if it was the Starbucks app, it might say, and now we would like to, we might put a prompt up that says, would you like to receive free coffees and extra, scones, and coupons for other offerings? And you say yes, and then it says, would you like push notifications? You say yes.
Exactly. Yeah. So in the case of Pinterest, we haven't found a good value prop at the front of that says like, oh, that's why I should accept push notifications. But I know plenty of others who have.
What about saying something like, would you like to see trending pins from your friends? Or the most popular pins from your friends?
So our experiments to date have been a little bit more generic than that. That's what we're going to be doing in the future. We haven't given up on this idea, but we're going to be trying something like more specific. The challenge we have is we use push for a lot of different things. So it's not just trending pins. It's what your friends have done.
So that would be a little dishonest to say like, we're going to turn it on for this, but we're actually going to use it for that.
Exactly. So what we're actually doing instead is we're probably going to be pruning a lot of the push notifications so that when we say it's about trending pins, it's really just that. And then if that improves push notification acceptance, we can try like different
Because
value
everybody
props.
kind of with push notifications just went for the machine gun approach, like because they got the crack hit of people re-engage their apps,
Yes.
but then they wore out the channel. They burned out the channel.
Yes, I mean, burned out's a strong word, but they made people more skeptical of the channel, right?
Yeah.
So like new apps pay the price for what Facebook did, which is just like, oh, you're not on Facebook right now? Your friend posted the photo. Push notification. It's like, okay.
I'm going to get there eventually.
I can kind of guess I had a friend that posted the photo in the hour I wasn't on Facebook.
You know what
if you talk to the Facebook growth team, they'll be like, yeah, there's just no limit to the amount of push you can send. And it's like, yeah, but you've basically ruined it for every other company in the world.
You know, this is Facebook's approach, right? Which is like they're going to blow out the channel, and if 20% of people don't like it, then that's their problem.
Yeah, it's the same thing they do with email, and a lot of the same reasons apply with email.
They're kind of ruthless, right? It's like ruthless growth strategy, and then there's people who are considered. What do you think is the best advice for a startup? Should you be ruthless like Facebook, or should you be considered like a Pinterest might be?
It really depends on your brand. And it depends on what your numbers look like. So Facebook has such high engagement numbers that people aren't going to leave Facebook pretty much no matter how pissed they get with any growth activity. Like you talk to people that use Facebook, everyone hates that they use Facebook. They don't like that they're going to it all the time, but they're still going to it all the time.
You have no choice, yeah.
Yeah, you feel like you have no choice. So if like you feel like you have the user that locked in, which is very rare, you can be as ruthless as you want and you'll grow your metrics by that. Whereas, Pinterest, it's a community where people are like very particular in terms of what they're interested in terms of how they like to use it. So if you're just every 5 seconds saying that like, oh, your friend posted the pin, people are like, I don't use Pinterest for my friends. I use Pinterest for me. And at minimum, I'm going to turn off push notifications so that when something relevant does happen, we can't actually push him or her. But at the max, they might like delete the app and then just use it on the web, right? Which means that they're going to use it a lot less frequently. So we are more conservative.
That's the quick way to disable notifications, delete the app.
That's what most people do. Now, on conversion optimization, we actually have taken a much more aggressive approach. And basically for us, the way we view the future is the only thing that matters is how many people you get using your app on a phone. The web will surely exist, but like our engagement data is just so heavily app focused. So like if you're landing on mobile web from Google or Facebook, we are going to be so aggressive about getting
like LinkedIn
that.
is.
LinkedIn
is like you just can't use this on your Safari browser on your phone.
Yeah.
We're going to make it so brutally painful.
Yeah, I mean, we're a JavaScript machine at Pinterest, right? So JavaScript's pretty slow on mobile web. It's even slower in international countries.
Yeah. But the billboard just totally roadblocking you on LinkedIn is just infuriating for some people who don't want to use the app.
It is, and I mean, LinkedIn's engagement is different as well, right?
Yeah.
Even though it's a social network, it tends to be more transactional. So there are issues to consider. But like we just are like, if you're on mobile web, we got one chance, we're going for it.
Okay, let's take another question for Casey.
I have a question about experimenting with where you showed the mobile web experience where it's like download the app.
Yeah.
And it pops up right at the top. Have you tried modals as well? And does it work better to have it at the top of the page and they scroll through it, or does it work better to have a modal that they then execute?
So let's see if I can get there. So by modal, you mean something that appears over the screen but doesn't block all of it?
Yeah, that appears over the top that you would X out of versus something you would scroll through.
So
have you guys?
It depends on what you're optimizing for. So we are also optimizing for Google, and Google does not like things that block the page anymore. So here it is.
Yeah, they're getting clever to that. They're like, because they don't want the experience from Google search to be roadblocks.
Yes.
So that means they're not fond of Quora, I bet, because Quora. But actually, I think Quora changed their strategy. You're allowed to see one question then they start roadblocking.
Yes.
I wonder if that was a reaction to Google's.
It most likely was. I think they also got a manual penalty at some point from Google, so they got their hands slapped a bit.
Yeah.
So that's never happened with Pinterest, but basically Google announced in September, they're like, hey, November 7th, I believe it was, we will start marking websites with app interstitials on mobile web as non-mobile friendly. And what that was like a veiled way to say is like, your rankings are going to drop on mobile unless you get rid of mobile app interstitials. So we're like, crap, this is a really effective way we grow. So how do we keep the spirit of what we're trying to do, but fall within Google's guidelines? So we tested this where it feels like an interstitial, but you can just scroll down instead of having to like click off to see something.
Yeah.
This fits within Google's guidelines. It may not fit within the spirit of their guidelines. And they may make a decision not to support this at all, but we're not the only ones doing this approach.
It's so heavy-handed when you think about it. Google's big fear is that people stop using the web and go to apps because then they're not the intermediary. So they basically came up with a new rule that stops you from reducing the addiction to Google search traffic.
Exactly, right? And
It's so nefarious.
All platforms do this. Facebook has been even more aggressive with this, where people paid to get likes, assuming that they could have free distribution to anyone that liked their page. And then after a bunch of people did that, Facebook was like, oh, now you actually have to pay to reach them, even though they already like your
You get
your
5%
page.
for free.
Yeah, 5% free.
Rainn Wilson went crazy. He's like, I have 100,000 people. I reached 3. This is not fair.
Yeah. So there's a risk of building growth on top of one platform, which is why I talked about multiple platforms and didn't just say throw all of your eggs in one basket. So one is that platforms work for different businesses. If no one's searching for your stuff, SEO is not going to work for you, right? But even if all of these work, you probably want to start to invest in things that can build direct connection to your users, right? Because if you're a travel site and you're getting 90% of your traffic from Google and Google launches Google Flights, your stock goes down like 60%, which is what happened with Expedia and Priceline when this happened, right? So there's just a huge risk of being platform dependent. Early on, you couldn't care less, right? Because you have one platform that's working.
Yeah, you got one.
Yeah.
But then becoming independent of it means owning email relationships, owning app relationships,
Exactly.
owning social media relationships across a wider number of sites.
Right. And I mean,
And brand.
yeah, and brand, right? So
Because I type in Pinterest manually.
right.
Like I'm not showing up at Pinterest anymore because I typed in something. Like I was looking at tiny homes the other day. I was like, where would I look for really good curated lists of tiny homes? And number one, I went to Pinterest, and number two, I went to Instagram.
Yep.
And I did the tag for tiny homes, and I found more than I could ever imagine on both places.
Yeah, exactly. So like
Pinterest obviously was much better than Instagram, but Instagram was nice because I would have it in my flow for the next couple of weeks.
Right. Yeah, it's important to try to build that direct audience, right? Like it's fine at an early stage to like rely on Google or rely on Facebook to grow or rely on like a specific paid advertising channel. But when you get to the late stage like Pinterest or a public company, that is seen as a big risk factor because ultimately Google or Facebook controls your fate as growth of a business.
Will pinfluencers eventually be able to, do you think, make money the same way like a YouTuber can? Like, is there a job to be had as a pinfluencer?
There's certainly the scale to have that job, and then I think there's an open question from the product side whether that's something we want to enable. So we are just going to start piloting some stuff around like Tastemaker, Pinfluencer tools this quarter, and we're going to see how it goes. We're just not sure if that's the.
They would buy a tool. They would pay you for a tool.
No,
or?
we'll build tools for them.
Got
right?
it.
So that's a step. Like basically, people got a lot of distribution from Pinterest. We just kind of ignored it and built a bunch of other parts of the business. Now we're going to go back to that and make sure that we're actually like handling these people well, making sure they have a continued good experience because they face different problems than normal users.
And do you want people using the platform that way? Do you want me to, as a startup, look at it and say, hey, there's an opportunity here for me to put up all the news stories from Inside Today in a collection with the images, and then it'll drive some number of people back to my platform. Is that something you want?
I think it's something we're moving towards, yes. Right now, it's certainly not the most important thing for us.
Right.
but like we want content that's interesting to Pinterest users, right? So if people want to watch This Week in Startups or launch episodes on Pinterest, we want to make sure that content is there. So obviously we started with a few verticals that were really important, like DIY and fashion and home decor. And at some point you get into a content expansion modeling approach to growth where you're like, okay, we're important in these verticals. What's an additional vertical we want to expand into?
Right.
And right now we haven't done a lot of that. The expansion of content has been more organic, not really driven by us saying, oh, let's go after men's fashion.
Right.
But in the future, I could see that a direction we go.
You could verticalize, because Pinterest does mean to people fashion, and I think in a lot of people's mind it means women.
Right.
But
especially in the US.
in the US especially, but you do see people using it for collections of things, that are outside of it. So you could have a podcast collection where somebody put together a group of podcasts or cool products. Like Product Hunt in a way is a verticalized Pinterest.
Yeah, I agree with that. And like, for example, I have like 50 boards on music because I was a music blogger before. And that's just me like pinning YouTube videos of music videos. Not a typical case for Pinterest, but it works because it's a tool that can be used for whatever you're interested in. And we could probably make the product better in that specific case if we choose to.
Sure, because if it was MP3s or YouTube videos, it could play like a playlist as opposed to being a board. It could be more like a list.
Exactly.
So there's some UI tweaking. Yeah,
that's one of the things that's great about Pinterest from a growth perspective is like there's always a lot of ideas on the table you can work with, and then we're still ruthlessly prioritizing even at 750 employees. So
wow. What's the number of unique visitors now per month ballpark? What was the last public figure? Is that public?
So
north of 100, right?
We don't talk about unique visitors.
Okay.
We just talk about monthly active users who are actually signed in, and we announced 100 million
monthly active
users. Yeah.
Wow. So if somebody was passing through on YouTube or was not logged in, they wouldn't count.
Exactly.
Wow. So then it's going to be a magnitude more. You must have 5 times more transient people. It could be 2 or 3, 4, 500 million people.
I will neither confirm nor deny that number.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody have a final question? Go ahead.
So with Grubhub, you guys had to sign up all the restaurants first. Do you have any recommendations on tips on signing up small, medium businesses fast?
Yeah.
Great
question. So
suffer. That's your advice? Suffer.
No. So a big thing for us is small businesses have been sold everything under the sun, so they're so inherently skeptical of whatever your product offering is. So you have to make it so easy to try, and they almost have to get the value without putting in any effort themselves. So for Grubhub, we would literally go to them and be like, we will send you more orders. You will only pay if you get more orders. You can cancel at any time. And you don't have to do a thing because you have this fax machine that's sitting right here, and we will just send the orders through that. And all you have to do is make the food, which you already know how to do. We literally would have customers that like after 4 years and hundreds of thousands of orders from Grubhub, they'd visit the website for the first time. And they would be like, oh, this thing is cool. Like, oh, there's all these restaurants you can order from. And like, yeah, why do you think you've gotten hundreds of thousands of orders
So
from us?
Study all the objections, remove them, and then not be afraid. Don't put any work on them.
Yeah. I mean, that's not always possible, right? But like, there like couldn't have been more friction removed from the Grubhub sales process. Like it just was so easy. And it was so easy, and it basically printed money for restaurants.
It's really interesting too, because if you look at a company like DoorDash or Postmates, they've actually taken it to the next level, which is they don't even get permission from the restaurant.
Yeah.
Which some restaurants are very upset about.
Yes.
Like In-N-Out hamburgers, it's like you cannot put our menu on your service and confuse people on Postmates, because people were, and then they actually put the hidden menu on it.
Yep.
I think on DoorDash or Postmates, and people were just ordering it.
Yeah, and their couriers are specifically told not to identify themselves and things like that.
I am just a dude coming back for the 4th time for $65 worth of animal-style burgers.
Yeah, it's literally like in the training manuals of DoorDash to do that. I think of it as like, hey, from a moral perspective or from a long-term relationships with restaurants perspective, you have to think about if that's the right call for them. But from like a getting up and running perspective, you take a large part of Grubhub's like startup costs and you just remove that and you validate whether people
the
will
Grubhub
pay.
CEO was pissed about it.
Yes, he wrote a Medium post about it.
Yeah. But that goes to sort of, you've been in the industry for a little while, and like, we have moved to a ruthless growth gestalt. Do you feel sometimes that your considered growth approach is outdated now and that you are at risk by not being ruthless enough? And how do you reconcile that yourself? Because you're such a considered person about this.
Yeah.
And do you have dialogue with this with your team and CEO and everything?
Yes, we do, right? Yeah. And we've made decisions in the past to not do things because they were too aggressive, and we've made decisions to be like, fuck it, we're doing it, right? Yeah. Again, it goes back to like, what are the principles of the business? Like for someone like Grubhub, it was so important to just have the restaurants like really value us, really respect us, lower that churn rate. So to do things behind their back was just like antithetical to the entire like mission of the company. Whereas like what DoorDash and Postmates are trying to do, ultimately, if you talk to their CEOs, they don't actually care about food delivery. They are trying to build a future FedEx, right? And food delivery is the easiest way to get demand built so that you can have a supply network that's going 0 to 100 all the time. And then once you do that, you just expand into other verticals. And I think eventually they probably wouldn't want food delivery to be, more than like 10% of their business. Whether that is a smart business model, like I can't say. Yeah. But like it fundamentally changes how you think about restaurants as partners. Restaurants are like, in their case, like crash test dummies, right? Like just put a body here so that I can get a product over here, and that will teach me how to like get a shirt over here later, or an Apple charger. So I think it really depends on like who your customers are, what they value, and are you going to do something that sacrifices the long term with like your short term tactics?
The lesson we've learned as an industry is Facebook, which had dozens and dozens of lawsuits, some of which were fraudulent, but many of which were quite legitimate, where, for example, they allowed people to put other people into groups that they had not joined, post on their wall that they joined the groups. And so a group of young gay men who were in a gay choir at a college campus were put into the group by the leader of the group. Leader of the group didn't know these three boys had not come out to their or young adults had not come out to their families. Their families found out. Jason joined the gay boys choir at, Stanford.
Right.
It's just a growth technique that happened to ruin some people's lives and force them to come out. And I think that has not stopped Facebook from having a $250 billion valuation or $500 billion valuation. Basically, bad behavior and not caring about users is rewarded in our industry. That is the sad truth, isn't it?
I mean, I don't think that's 100% case, right? Like,
just the majority case.
Give me your counter. It's kind of one of those things where like we see the outliers, right? Okay. So Facebook, no one can say whether any of that stuff mattered to them growing faster or if they would have grown faster if they hadn't done that. And you can talk to people on the Facebook growth team that will say like, I don't know, man, like would we be growing faster if we didn't spam the crap out of people with push notifications, or would we be growing slower, or would it not matter at all? They just don't know. They have like the healthiest activation rate of any business that we've ever seen. More users than any business we've ever seen. It's just really hard to say. Like you're not going to do an A/B test at that point. You just made a call. I don't think like a lot of that stuff is necessary. But it goes back to like what really is going to help you achieve your goals over the long term. And where growth teams go astray a lot of times is they'll do something that moves a number in the short term that sacrifices the long term. Facebook has never gotten into that challenge because like it just doesn't matter how much they want to take a crap on their users. People are going to come back.
It's a utility. They can. It's almost like a monopoly.
They can't. So they have an insane amount of freedom. In the case of like DoorDash, Postmates scenario, like I think there it's more like we don't fundamentally believe restaurants are our customers.
Therefore, if we burn that channel, who cares?
Yeah, if we burn the channel.
If we lose 20% of the channel or 10% of the channel, and In-N-Out we have to play cat and mouse with, who cares?
Exactly.
Restaurants will be 20%, and In-N-Out and those people who object are 10% of the 20%, so it's 2% overall.
Yeah, so an actual good case study on this is kind of the Uber versus Lyft approach to marketing. Yeah. So if you talk to traditional marketing and be like, man, Lyft has such a stronger brand. They know who they are. They took a lot of consideration into like making getting into a stranger's car feel safe.
The mustache, the fist bump.
Yeah,
sit in the front
title,
seat.
The
all the annoying stuff.
The tagline was like your friend in a car.
Yeah.
And hey, if the really big issue to that market was like the fear of getting into a stranger's car, they would have won. It just turned out it wasn't. It was like how cheap it was to get from A to B.
Absolutely.
And Uber operationalized that a hell of a lot better than they are. So like
I would actually argue it went in the, I mean, listen, I have a horse in the race, obviously, but I think people getting in the car did not want to interact with the driver.
Well, yeah, people wanted more of a taxi-like experience where like, just don't talk to me, man.
I'm taking it so that I could decompress and not have to drive or not and do work, right? Like.
But fundamentally, the reason you're not taking a taxi right now to do that and you're taking an Uber is that Uber is cheaper and more available, right? So they focused on those two things.
Yeah.
And
wait time and
Uber fundamentally doesn't care if you talk to the driver or not. If you want to sit in the front or the back, they don't care.
Yeah.
Whereas Lyft ended up spending a lot of times on things that they identified as a key need that ended up not being near as key need as what Uber optimized for.
The culture that they tried to create, because culture matters, but it was an example of culture not mattering. Like, so culture does matter. It doesn't mean culture matters in every case. There could be something more important in culture, which is the price.
Yeah, I mean,
something could trump culture.
But it could have easily been a scenario where Lyft was right? Like it could have been easily like no one would have used Uber because just the concept of like getting in with a random stranger was terrible, and then Lyft alleviated that fear, and they could have won. Like
they did make a change, right? They did take the mustaches off. They did stop the fist bumping. I think they did try to dial back some of those.
They totally have, but I think they recognize the error way too late, right? Yeah. So like Uber wins with ruthlessness, but I think it's more so the ruthlessness. It was just operational efficiency. They got more cars.
I would say ruthless efficiency, just like the ruthless growth approach for Facebook,
right?
Which I would say was ruthless sharing in a way, like ruthless updating of stuff, right? Like when in doubt, update people on what's going on.
Yeah.
And then Uber's was just how can we drive this price down and drive the wait time?
Well, it connects to Facebook's mission which is like connect the entire world, right? Yeah. So like they're not going to let anything get in front of that goal for them. So if like you connect people in a Facebook group that didn't really want to be connected, and it's like, no, fuck it, we're going to connect people. That's our goal, right? But if your mission is something different, then
I actually think that's how they think. I think that's actually how Zuckerberg thought.
I think it's definitely how Zuckerberg thinks.
And I think he's, to a certain extent, started to change it a little bit. But when you see now he's had a child, and you would think somebody with, possibly security concerns. He had a guy who was outside of his house constantly. He's got security. It's a big deal to be in his, station in life. He's sharing pictures of his daughter every day. Changing diapers. So he actually is. I think it's actually authentic that he believes everybody should share everything with everybody.
Yeah, he believes in an open, connected world, and he's actually like pretty close to achieving that vision.
Yeah.
There are some things you and I may not like about it, but they're being successful, and I think it certainly feeds into how the growth team operates. Now, what's interesting, like you probably know some of those people as well internally that have worked on that growth team. Like the internal culture is very similar to how the external tactics are revealed, right? Where it's like, I think they have like the highest firing rate on any team at Facebook and stuff like that. They just embody every element of that ruthlessness, right? So they're consistent. It's not about like, oh, we're mean to our users, but we're nice to each other. It's like, no, it's whatever gets the job done. I don't care if you're my friend. Like this needs to happen.
Interesting. So Casey and I would like to give you all a piece of advice. Just be ruthless and don't care about people. If you take anything from this talk and our time together, Casey's laughing. That's not Casey's message.
Ben Silberman would not agree with that.
Ben does not agree. It's not Casey's message. It is my message, clearly. No, I mean, I've struggled with this myself, which is because I was super critical of Facebook. And now I kind of feel like you have to find your own North Star to a certain extent, right? Because you have to be able to sleep at night and be okay with who you are.
Yeah.
But the truth is, you're not operating in a vacuum as a startup. You're operating against competitors. And if you're not willing to be ruthless in your own success and your own growth, and your competitors are, you are going to get crushed.
It's a very good point. And for Pinterest, we don't have a lot of direct competition.
Delicious.
Yeah.
Stumble upon.
Yeah.
They're lining up.
Do they still exist? Okay.
No.
I think Stumble Upon does.
Stumble Upon, yeah, they had little resurgence.
But yeah, so Pinterest didn't have the competitive threat that like Uber had with Lyft, right? So it does create a little bit less pressure.
Mm-hmm.
Facebook early on, they just fundamentally thought MySpace would destroy them, right?
It was a paranoid
there was a paranoia there.
FriendFeed, they were concerned about Paul's company, FriendFeed,
Yeah.
because it was so much better design, so much better design. Yeah.
I disagreed with that when I used FriendFeed, but yeah, some people thought it was much more innovative.
For influencers, they love the Ajax nature of like, I posted a comment and then yours actually showed up, which they eventually actually put into the Facebook feed.
Yep. Yeah, so the threat of competition, I think, plays a large role in how ruthless these companies have been versus some that have been less ruthless in maybe the Pinterest case. But I think even a broader point of that is like, what are your goals as a company? What really drives success? You're probably going to be way more aggressive at the things that really matter than the things that don't. I think for Pinterest, if we were aggressive in that way, like that wouldn't actually correlate as much to our success as it had at Facebook and Uber. So it's not as useful to do. It's also not in our DNA, so we're probably not going to be as good at it as Uber and Facebook.
Yeah, you'd have to like have Chamath and those people on the team say, okay, now all you guys being nice to each other and kind to the users and really being considered, I'd like you to stop being considered and start thinking only about growth when you make these decisions.
Yeah, in which, if you try to inject Chamath into Pinterest, he would eat quite a few people alive and the rest of the people would leave, right? So it would just be he would be like, and I say this with like a fundamental respect of what Chamath has done, but he's just a very different type of personality that we have at our company, right? So he'd either be rejected or he would like flush out everyone and have to rebuild Pinterest entirely.
And that kind of attitude might, the fact that so many, we have this big issue in 2016 where this video was recorded of women not feeling comfortable in online communities. And if you think about Pinterest, they have gathered there in larger numbers than any other community in the history of the web. And I think that's fair to say. And they feel safe.
They feel safe.
Yeah.
And it's important not just for our user base of Pinterest to feel comfortable and feel diverse, but also like the internal culture, right? So we've made a lot of commitments to our hiring being
you're amongst the most diverse,
Yeah, and I think we're more diverse than most technology companies, but we still feel pretty embarrassed at what the numbers look like, right?
Yeah.
So like we've made a commitment to balance that we're hoping a lot of other technology companies follow in the future.
Well, listen, the liberals in Hollywood are having the same issue with the Academy Awards and the Oscars, right? This is a societal issue that everybody is, tuning into and trying to solve.
Yeah, there's an interesting argument with the Oscars, right? Where it's if you apply like percentages to the population, like just even on a random variance, you would sometimes have representation and sometimes not have representation.
Right, because it's only 6 people. And certain groups might be 10%.
Nominees.
There might be only 15% of the population is Asian.
Exactly, right? So like 1 every 2 years, you would expect an Asian person to get nominated or something. I think they're well under all of those.
Yeah, but, they're still horrible.
So I think for a while you can be like, oh, well, this is just random variation. But now it's like, oh, well, I think they had 1 year where like Denzel Washington and Halle Berry won the same year, but then like every other year it's been pretty much white people. So they're trying to figure it out.
Yeah. All right. Any more questions? This has been just so helpful, I think, and this post, breakdown of the talk, I think is also really helpful for everybody to just think about the world you're creating. One of the really unique things about being an entrepreneur is that you get to create the world in which you go to work every day and in which your users go to experience your product. And that's a great takeaway from Casey's talk, is create the world that you want to see exist out there, right? So big round of applause for Casey. Well done. Good job.